And we're going to be right behind them, and we're going to be working. We're going to be supplying them with things if they don't have them. We want them to have them. We're going to be helping them with ventilators after this is over so that they can't say, oh, the federal government. We want them to have, they've had a lot of options. Many of the governors have had a lot of options over the years to buy ventilators. They didn't choose to do it. So we're going to be helping them to fill up their stockpiles. We're going to have plenty. And as I said, I'm very proud to do it. We're going to be helping other nations. We're going to be helping Italy, Spain, France, other nations. And we're going to be helping them strongly. I think Russia is going to need ventilators. They're having a hard time in Moscow. We're going to help them. We're going to help other countries that need ventilators. We're going to have a lot. You see it with General Motors. You see it with other companies that are producing. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of ventilators, and it's a great thing to have. Yes, in the back, please. Is anybody freezing? You know, it's very cold out here, so we can leave early, right? Okay, a couple of more. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Why do we have 20% of the world's deaths from the coronavirus and we're only 4% of the world's population?
Well, you don't know what you have. Do you think you're getting honest numbers from some of these countries? Do you really believe those numbers in this vast country called China, and that they have a certain number of cases and a certain number of deaths? Does anybody really believe that? Here's the story. We report everything. We're reporting the cases, and our reporting is good. We're reporting every death. In fact, I see this morning where New York added 3,000 deaths because they died, and they're now saying, rather than it was a heart attack, they're saying it was a heart attack caused by this, so they're adding. If you look at it, that's it. And everything we have is documented, reported. And what they are doing is, just in case, they're calling it this, and that's okay. That's okay. But we have more cases because we do more reporting. We have more cases because everything is down. But does anybody really believe the numbers of some of these countries that you've been watching and you've been reporting on, and then it's like they didn't have the big thing? There have been some really, really bad, heavily in really some countries that are in big, big trouble, and they're not reporting the facts, and that's up to them. All I know is we report the facts, and we're a country that's getting better. John, go ahead.
Mr. President, multiple sources are telling Fox News today that the United States government now has high confidence that while the coronavirus is a naturally occurring virus, it emanated from a virology lab in Wuhan, that because of lax safety protocols, an intern was infected, who later infected her boyfriend, and then went to the wet market in Wuhan, where it began to spread. Does that correspond with what you have heard from officials?
Well, I don't want to say that, John, but I will tell you more and more we're hearing the story. And we'll see. When you say multiple sources, now there's a case where you can use the word sources. But we are doing a very thorough examination of this horrible situation that happened. Go ahead, please.
In your many conversations with President Xi, Mr. President, did you ever discuss with him State Department concerns about lax safety protocols that had been reported to the State Department from the embassy in Beijing about that laboratory?
I don't want to discuss what I talked to him about the laboratory. I just don't want to discuss it. It's inappropriate right now. Please go ahead in the back.
Tim Arvia from Channel 9 Australia. There have been calls in our country for Prime Minister Scott Morrison to make funding for WHO conditional on reforms to the organisation. Wanted to get your thoughts on that, and if you had any advice for Mr. Morrison.
Look, I feel very badly about the World Health Organization, but it's been a tool of China. It's been, as I say, totally China-centric. You take a look at everything that's happened, they've been wrong. I was all for it at the beginning. What do I know? I walked in, I said, World Health Organization, isn't that wonderful? And then you start to see all the mistakes. They didn't want us to close our borders to China, to Wuhan. Specifically, they didn't want our borders closed. You take a look, Mike was there, we're all there, and they're criticizing me for closing the border. I did that very early. By the way, I did that very early while Nancy Pelosi was trying to have in San Francisco parties in Chinatown because she thought it would be great. She wanted to show that this thing doesn't exist. These are people, I'll tell you, we have some politicians on the other side that don't know what they're doing. If you look at timelines, you got to look at some timelines. But the World Health Organization, just like the World Trade Organization, I'm telling you, I call them, they have been treating the United States for decades so badly, and they've been so in favor of China. China took off when it joined the World Trade Organization because of what's happened. Think of it. They're considered a developing nation, and because they're and we're not. But we're a developing nation too in my book, okay? We're developing too. But the fact is, we have been treated so badly by these organizations, and believe me, I'm looking at that one too. We're winning a lot of lawsuits right now that we never won before in the past. We're winning a lot of money that we never won in the past. That's with the World Trade. But with the World Health Organization, what's happened there is a disgrace. Here's the other thing. We pay $400 to $500 million a year. China's paying $38, $39, and $40 million a year. And it's like they control this group. I could do that too if I want to devote full time to it or have some very capable people dealing with Dr. Tedros, okay? I could do it too. I could do very well with that. But there's something going on. There's something going on that's very bad. Now, the $500 million that we save, we're going to make a determination over a little period of time. But they're going to either have to make massive changes. I don't even know if they're going to be able to do that. Or we're going to give money to people. We want to help people. You know what we do in Africa with AIDS? People have no idea what we do. And the money we spent. We were talking about it the other day, Doctor. We are spending billions of dollars to help people. In the case of one that Dr. Birx is very much involved in, AIDS, billions of dollars. And you know what? It's a great thing. Nobody talks about it. Nobody gives us credit. We do that, and we do it very directly. But we're spending billions of dollars to help people live, and all over the world. But we're spending $500 million to the World Health Organization, and there's something very bad going on. And you know what? I've gotten very much involved. It's been going on for a long period of time, and we don't want to be the suckers anymore. So it's cold out. We will talk to you tomorrow. Big day tomorrow. Very big day. Thank you.
President, if Dr. Tedros is removed, would you change your mind?
Good evening, welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. Breaking tonight, we have just watched the daily coronavirus task force briefing at the White House. President Trump saying the country has passed the peak of the pandemic. We also have new information tonight that you heard John Roberts ask about the origins of the coronavirus. Multiple sources say this may be the costliest government cover-up of all time by China. The belief now, you heard the chairman of the Joint Chiefs asked about it, that the intelligence was inconclusive. But there is a growing belief that the COVID-19 virus originated in the Wuhan lab, not as a bioweapon, but as China's effort to find and deal with viruses to show the world China was as good as or better than the U.S. on that front. It's believed that the virus was bat to human, and then the human, patient zero, worked at the lab, went into the population in Wuhan, and the virus quickly spread from there. China, according to sources, moved quickly to shut down travel domestically from Wuhan to the rest of China, but did not immediately stop international flights from Wuhan. These sources say the World Health Organization was complicit from the beginning, helping China cover its tracks, and that is where we begin tonight. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off. Good evening, John. You asked about this reporting tonight, got something from the president, and obviously part of the reason why the president's coming down so hard on the WHO.
Yeah, there certainly has been a real change in tone from back in early February when the president described the WHO as some of the best and the brightest. Clearly, as this information begins to develop and is beginning to gain more traction now among U.S. officials, the president is changing his mind not only about the WHO, but about what happened in China. I asked him directly the information that you and I had discussed earlier today. He didn't really go down the road of a concrete answer, but he did suggest that he's looking at that, and that is becoming something that the federal government really wants to know a whole lot more about, Brett.
Obviously, China has pushed back about this line. The WHO came out publicly and said they were disappointed in the U.S. decision. But the president appears to be at least warming up to this line of thinking. And really, the origins of this virus become a big, big story if it all pans out as these sources are saying.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And that's why I asked the president the follow-up, because he speaks to President Xi on many, many different occasions. He says he's got a great relationship with him. So I asked the president if in any of the conversations that he has had in recent months with President Xi, or even going back a couple of years, because there is this reporting, which we have confirmed now, that officials from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing visited this virology lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and were concerned enough about a lack of safety protocols there that they cabled back to the State Department that something should happen on this front to tighten up those security protocols. That's why I asked the president if he ever spoke to President Xi about that. The president said, I'm not going to tell you what I told President Xi or talked to him about in regard to the laboratory, but it does sort of indicate that there may have been a conversation there. In the meantime, as all of this new information is swirling, the president still embroiled in the midst of controversy over his decision here in the Rose Garden last night, or at least the announcement that he was going to at least temporarily cut funding for the World Health Organization. President Trump and his team today standing by his decision to cut funding to the World Health Organization for 60 to 90 days. The White House insisting the WHO dropped the ball on the initial outbreak in China.
The minor return on our investment would be for the WHO to be honest about the origins of the virus in Wuhan, about the fact that it was human-to-human transmission. They lied about that or weren't transparent about that.
The head of the WHO critical of the decision.
This is a time for all of us to be united in our common struggle against a common threat, a dangerous enemy.
The move also drawing fire from Democrats. In a statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying, this is another case, as I have said, of the president's ineffective response, that a weak person, a poor leader, takes no responsibility. A weak person blames others. This decision is dangerous, illegal, and will be swiftly challenged. Another issue the president is drawing fire on, soon to be distributed paper checks for those $1,200 economic impact payments. When they start going out next week, the checks will have the president's name in the memo section. President Trump wanted taxpayers to know he supported the payments. The idea brought howls of criticism from Democrats.
I wish it were the only ego trip. It seems almost every day the president thinks this crisis revolves about him and his desires, his needs, his enemies.
But claiming credit for economic incentives is nothing new. In 2009, the Obama administration was criticized for spending $1.3 million on road signs across the country, touting projects from its stimulus package. And in 2001, the Bush administration sent out letters to people about to receive tax rebates, letters that were derided as a campaign commercial. Today, President Trump was gathering wool on ideas to reopen government, speaking with dozens of members of his Great American Economic Revival groups in different sectors of the economy. In the sports category, Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban.
I think the biggest mistake we can make is rush to a decision, but I'm going to help them in every way I can.
The Centers for Disease Control and FEMA are also drafting proposals for reopening. In a draft version confirmed by Fox News, the agencies recommend coming out of mitigation in a controlled way with robust monitoring systems in place to contain new cases and outbreaks, and adding that leaders at all levels will need to prepare communities for occasionally returning to stricter mitigation measures for brief periods as needed to continue containing the disease. And the urgent need for a fourth economic rescue package became even more urgent today. Those paycheck protection loans tapped $300 billion today, and sources tell Fox News that that fund could be exhausted as soon as tomorrow. Meantime, a $250 billion plan to re-up that fund, Brett, is so far stalled in Congress with no sign that it's going anywhere. Brett?
All right, John Roberts live in the Rose Garden. John, thanks. We'll have continuing news of that, the breaking news at the top. Also interesting in that news conference today, the president threatening to use constitutional powers to adjourn Congress to get some of his nominees through in a recess appointment. That would be the first time for any president in history if that happened, and would likely be challenged. When we come back, some good news in tough times, the brighter side.
Story of reopening our economy. It's a story of what exactly is going on inside the laboratories in China, studying pathogens at unsafe biosafety levels. There's growing concern that this virus looks like it may have escaped from a lab if you listen to scientists writing in various medical journals and scientists around the world. Certainly in places like Asia and outside countries in Asia are pushing back against China's narrative that it's natural in origin. Your reaction to that story?
It looks like it has a lot of legs to it. I wish the Democrats and the media would also push back against China's lies. I know we are as Republicans in Congress. Ultimately, whether it came out of a lab or not, here's what we do know. We do know that China deliberately hid the virus and deliberately allowed the spread of it around the world. And we could have prevented a lot of the death and destruction that we have seen. We do know that for sure. You asked about reopening the economy. That's not an option. We have to, and we can. And we have to tell people the truth about what's about to happen. We have to be able to live our lives and reopen society alongside fighting the pandemic. Now, you can do that. We have to remind people why we flattened the curve in the first place. It was to allow our health system to catch up and not get overwhelmed. It was strained, but it was not broken. And when we look at places like right here in Houston, well, our healthcare system is empty. Our hospitals are completely empty. And, we're looking at peaks and obsessing over when the peak is, but the reality is that peak is still very, very low and wouldn't overwhelm our hospital system. And we have to encourage leaders to take this data into account and make better judgments accordingly. I worry greatly that we're not striking that balance. So I'm glad to hear that the White House is coming out with a staged reopening plan. Our own governor plans the same thing. And local leaders across the country have to think harder about what makes sense and what doesn't. You were talking about Michigan a minute ago and how they banned the sale of seeds and gardening. That's insane. She deserves to have some people protesting her. We have to be smart about this and be honest with people, and we have to look at how to mitigate the risk and live with some resilience as American people. We can do this. I see it every day here at the ground level, and we're going to do it.
Here's the next shoe to drop in this developing story. This is going to turn into an emerging debt crisis story. We're seeing countries, 100 countries reach out to the IMF to access a total of $1 trillion in loans. Remember, we had rolling debt crises hit Mexico, hit Russia in decades past. Mexico has a severe, in Central America, growing COVID-19 outbreak. Are you for restricting our borders permanently until all of this is under control? Because we see China doing that, we see countries in Asia doing that, we see countries in Europe saying, we're going to sit tight and restrict our borders for now.
Yeah, that was one of the first actions taken, and it will probably be one of the last to be lifted, and for obvious and good reason. So, again, I'm absolutely in favor of what we need to do to keep the American people safe and prevent further outbreaks from basically seeding into the United States.
I want to turn back to China. Will you, or are you hearing anybody on the House side doing what Ron Johnson is doing in the Senate, and that is investigating both China and the WHO? Because State Department officials had warned about poor security at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in 2018. And an article in a group of scientists reported in the journal Nature Medicine last month that they cannot rule out that it could have been an accidental release of this virus by Chinese researchers. Congressman, we saw that with the SARS virus in 2003. It accidentally escaped the lab in China and killed 8 people.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't tell you who is sponsoring those bills in the House, but I assure you there will be companion bills to that. There should be an investigation into China and how they hid the virus and why. I'll be sponsoring a bill that would give executive authority to disallow Chinese officials into the United Nations if they had been a part of the propaganda techniques that they did.
Okay, Congressman, thank you so much. We had a hard wrap there. Great to see you. I'm Elizabeth McDonald. Thanks for joining the Evening Edit. We're going to stay on this